that's building a stable cryptocurrency. Initially, that's stable against the US dollar, and the goal is to produce something that's stable, completely independent of any fiat money.
Thank you very much for the introduction. This is mic work too. I think we have 3 mics on this stage. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. We're going to share. Thanks, everybody. First of all, thank you everybody for coming here this morning and sharing your insights from the different perspectives. I think it was really, really insightful. But no crypto conference is complete without some kind of prediction. So what I would love to do is for the next, I said we have about 20 minutes to predict the future. George, you were the last speaker, I think, and you said, well, you're mining for yourself if the price goes down, and I don't want to talk about price itself, but I really would like to think about the world in 2 years, maybe 5 years, and often we underestimate change that happens in the long run. Where will we be in 10?
Yeah, I actually can't comment on price because last time I did, I got in deep trouble with our legal counsel as we're preparing company for the IPO, so I have no comment whatsoever. But in terms of the future, what people have underestimated, and the people that don't touch crypto as much as we do, is the massive amount of IQ dedicated to coding, developing, and creating. In our part of the world, we're getting the best and the brightest, the kids that have won international mathematics competitions, international physics competitions, international, chess competitions. They're not going to Facebook, they're not going to Google, they're coming and working on protocols. And I think if anything, this is the bet on the youth, this is the bet on the IQ. And whenever Nuria Rubini or Krugman or Warren Buffett, whom I deeply respect, comment about this technology without understanding the IQ level, without understanding the technology, it's really paradox. So, in my opinion, you bet on the IQ. There is so much development going on. There's so much coding going on, and in my opinion, this is the technology that genie's out of bottle, and it will transform the world. It will be much more massive than internet. This is not about information. This is about assets. And many of you from Switzerland, banking, the asset management that you have been accustomed to through generations, this will be completely transformed. So pay attention, get engaged, and participate.
Yeah, I think I started the morning with that it is really transformation, including my friend Eyal who was sitting there. It's like the third revolution. With power, electricity is power over the wire. The phone was communication over the wire. And with blockchain, we have consensus and agreement and collaboration over the wire. Yeah.
So a perspective I want to share in this room is that if you think about the situation where a big company is providing some service, and they're doing a bad job of providing that service, the typical thing that will happen is that a startup, or many startups, will show up and try to do that better. And either end up eating that company's lunch, taking over that service and doing a better job, or forcing that incumbent to step up its game and provide a version of that service that everyone really likes. And up until now, that really hasn't been the state of things with government services, with currency in particular. So governments produce currencies, and there really hasn't been a whole domain of startup currencies to compete with those. And so if there are problems with those currencies, those tend to persist. There's sort of an artificial monopoly that's existed. And so my broad perspective on what's happening right now is that we have a really large number of startup currencies coming and disrupting that space. And it's a really interesting thing because if you look at the laws of the United States government, not even recent laws, but sort of very old laws, it's directly written in the laws that it's illegal to create new coins. It wasn't the plan for citizens to create many different currencies. That was actually sort of outlawed a long time ago. And it's funny because we even call these things coins, and yet no action has been taken to stop people from creating these new currencies. And I think that's, in a sense, because we as a society sort of forgot why we made those rules. And so there's this really interesting window of opportunity right now where we're kind of allowed to do this thing that we previously decided we didn't want to do. And so we have all these startup currencies coming into existence. And so I think the big question over the next several years is, are the entrepreneurs who are creating these new currencies, are they going to do better or are they going to do worse? Right? So if they do better, then okay, great. It's a good thing that we permitted that, and we can disrupt and actually sort of maybe even overturn the system of currencies and end up with something much better. And I personally believe we will. But I think that there's also a question of if we do worse in the short term, that actually could mess up this entire movement, this entire cycle. Okay, so when you look into stablecoins, which if you haven't already done, you're going to end up doing because they're going to be a really big deal. I think one important thing to think about is the possibility that we create a pegged cryptocurrency in the way that a middle-income country pegs its currency to the dollar, the euro, and so on. And it gets really big, and then that peg breaks. And if that happens, a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money. And they're not people who are crypto speculators in this circumstance. Because the people who are going to be drawn to stablecoins initially are the people who are dealing with sort of the worst currencies in the world, the ones that are inflating at the fastest pace, that are the most capital controlled. And so the currencies that are sort of the most ripe for that startup currency disruption are those broken ones. And the people who hold that money are often in a pretty disadvantaged position in the global economy. Right? So you have all these people putting their life savings into these stablecoins to opt out of that bad system into a new, better system. Now if that new, quote-unquote, better system breaks, and we have a massive sort of crisis for all those people, think about what that's going to do to the whole movement of cryptocurrency. It's the first really real-world widespread adoption of sort of money-like cryptocurrencies ends up leading to all those people losing their money. So kind of the message I wanted to share is just that I think that there's a real risk of that happening. I spent a lot of time looking at the projects in the space, and I'm running one of them myself, and I think that not all of them are economically sound. If you're an investor, you should be trying to convince the best monetary economists that you know to spend time with you, because it's actually totally feasible to tell which of these is going to work and not. And if you are an influencer in the space, now or in the future, I think it's sort of your responsibility to think about, okay, how do we prevent that crisis? How do we sort of guide this disorganized, ungoverned movement to produce things that are better and not worse? And
so what you're saying is expecting it's happening likely in those countries with those people that do not have a choice, like in Argentina when people decided to buy stereo equipment in the 80s to hedge against the inflation in their country. So whatever it is that's more stable than a non-functioning currency, they are looking more for
Absolutely.
that. Okay.
And if you look in, real fast, if you look in Venezuela, people are adopting cryptocurrencies despite their volatility, despite all of the usability issues, they really are using them. And so I think that as they become more stable and money-like, we're going to see really, really big waves in cryptocurrency.
And not only using, but also mining, like the dentist who makes his money by running an Ethereum on his GSM network phone.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's this pipe dream that sometimes gets run around between cryptocurrency enthusiasts, that somehow the very existence of cryptocurrency is going to cause governments to topple. That the governments, the people who own the tanks and the guns and the bombs and the submarines are just going to go, oh dear, Bitcoin's here, we don't own the tanks and the guns anymore. And that's obviously it's ludicrous to believe. At the same time, whilst I don't think that's going to happen, what I do think is going to happen in 2, 5, 10 years is regulatory arbitrage. Some governments around the world are going to go, hey, we should be a little bit clever here and make ourselves open to decentralized projects, whether that is through regulation, through tax breaks, whatever it is. The same way they attract movie companies to come and film on location in various parts of the world by offering them tax breaks. So regulatory arbitrage is going to become a real thing. It already exists in many ways within the United States, where people are able to go, hey, if I move 2 states over, I can cut my tax burden down by 10%. And so they do, they uproot their entire family and move. And companies are going to start incorporating, they already are starting to incorporate all over the world. They're taking a look at places like Malta and saying, hey, Malta's crypto friendly, we should totally incorporate there. And that's going to happen more and more. And eventually people, individuals and families are going to start to say, hey, we should uproot and move over there to this place that's crypto friendly or that's friendly to the company that I've started. It has good schools, the kids can go there. And grandma has a good care facility. And they're going to start doing this more and more, and it's not going to lead necessarily to governments being toppled, but it's going to lead to an interesting brain drain. And as George said, some of the smartest people on the planet are working on these things. And when they start clustering, when they start moving to places that are more friendly from a regulatory perspective, that's going to create something very, very interesting. And that's really what I see over the short to medium term.
Yeah, I think for the long term, there was an interesting conversation that we're going to have 45 mega cities around the world. It's not about countries anymore, it's about grouping of people that are having shared values, shared economic systems, and creating new things.
I'll take a slightly more practical perspective. While I think there is this beautiful social vision and political vision, economic vision that underlies the motivation a lot of people have when they get excited about cryptocurrencies. Greed is what attracted most people in 2017 and 2018. But what got people to stay is there is this fundamental excitement about the idea that we could reformulate how society works. But to Ricardo's point, it's interesting. I sit down with central bankers, and I remember sitting with folks from BIS and the Bundesbank, and we're talking about cryptocurrency, and they're like, yeah, but throughout human history, what has created currency regimes is the ability to defend your currency and your economy, which is equivalent to, right now, markets, right? The US is the largest market in the world, which is why the US dollar is dominant, and it's about guns and steel. It's about armies. And so I do think there is sometimes a little bit of an detachment from reality. One of the things I focus on, so the talent and the intellect and the vision is important, but one of the key things that's missing is how do we make this accessible to people? And the reason we have so many, I was saying this to Fluffy, I said, the reason we have so many pundits and influencers and conferences in the crypto space and everyone's talking and pontificating is because there aren't really so many products that people can use and touch and interact with today that create value in meaningful ways yet. And so to me, what I'm most interested and excited about, so number one, it's enabling people to get exposure to the products themselves in new ways that feel safe, that are risk managed. And to me, stablecoins are really just an abstraction of hedging and risk management, which has existed in the world of finance for a very long time. And then I think the second component is how do we actually fund and help really great projects and teams grow and develop, which is what I've done for the last 5 years, is how do we connect them with governments, how do we connect them with corporates, how do we connect them with investors, and how do we really allow these ideas to come together and create meaningful use cases that create new, delightful user experiences. That's what drives adoption. So to me, the fundamental point we're at in the crypto spaces, there's all this excitement and there are all these events and it's very interesting and it's very sexy and it feels very revolutionary and fun, but how do we make this real? And I think that doesn't mean, flying around the world and feeling like you're a rock star is going to exotic locales. It means sitting down in offices, doing work, trying to understand the regulatory environment and build things that people can use and trust and feel safe using. And so that's the hard part. It's not so fun, it's not so glamorous, but I think that's where we're going to see the center of gravity start to shift.
So making it real, I think, and I think all of you actually mentioned countries and jurisdictions. So where is it going to happen? The Chinese investing heavily into blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies for a while. I think, George, you mentioned that some of your key competitors coming from China, of course. I think last year here there was in the Russian House presentation with 3 Russian ministers, and they all said blockchain is one of the key top priorities for their country.
Putin signed Bitcoin, didn't you hear this? Like the big headline of January. Apparently the Kremlin wants to buy Bitcoin. It's hilarious.
So the Singaporeans working a lot, Malta works a lot, but I think where is it going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
New York. I think the financial centers that already exist. I think there's regulatory arbitrage and that's interesting, but I don't Malta's not a big financial market, and the issue with Malta is we've already seen this with banks, challenger banks or challenger financial services firms who move to Malta. The minute that the European regulators, the EU regulators don't like what's happening, they cut off access. So while it's great to be in Bermuda or Malta or in these jurisdictions, people want to be where the assets are and they want to be where the markets are. And until that shifts, I think it's going to take time. Right now, the center of gravity, it's in London, it's in Singapore, it's in Switzerland, it's in New York, it's in places for like Silicon Valley, right, for startups. These ecosystems have so much gravity already. I think it's going to be difficult to see that moving.
I mean, I can't see that 100%. I live in the US. I see the regulation and the challenges, and I see the brain drain coming out of the US into other areas where the jurisdiction is easier. But maybe I'm wrong.
So, can I answer that question real fast? So, my prediction would be that it's going to come from people who were bred in places like New York and Silicon Valley Berlin, etc., who have the entrepreneurial skill sets and the technical skill sets, who have the sort of gumption to move to the parts of the world that need the stuff the most. So a lot of people are like scared to move to Caracas. I think there are some bold people who are doing that, and I think that the combination of actually having the real world understanding, but then also having that sort of entrepreneurial drive, that's where my money is on. There's in Angola, there's a burgeoning app ecosystem, like startup apps. But it's really just guys who were in Silicon Valley, who went to Stanford, who are from Angola, who've gone back there and are translating that in and then dominating that market. And that's the pattern that I think.
And they don't have to move to Caracas, they can go to Puerto Rico, for example.
All right. If you take a bet on a guy from Silicon Valley that went to Stanford versus a Chinese entrepreneur, I'm putting my money on a Chinese entrepreneur, okay? This technology is not an American technology, it's not a Silicon Valley driven technology. It's truly decentralized global technology. And traveling around the world and seeing the resilience of entrepreneurs, my money is on the Chinese, my money is on Europeans, on the Africans. Obviously, there are some pockets in America, but what is very unique about this technology is truly global. And things are happening very fast, and the pockets of sort of a resilience are all around the world. And this is very different from internet.
And Africa is very close to my heart, as I live there. But Africa has an interesting history of being really slow to pick things up, and then when they do, they leapfrog. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to happen here, but it absolutely could. I've seen a lot of interesting things happening in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Tanzania. So there's definitely there are smart people that are working on interesting things in Africa itself.
I just got this time, we have about 2 minutes left, which means each of you have about 30 seconds for a final statement. And what we'd like to ask is what the people in the room here, what should they take with from today and for thinking about the blockchain environment over the next 5 years, to keep it in mind as a key thought for them.
Yeah, so this technology is all about self-reliance. This is a technology that you have to do your own homework. You have to close off the doors, you have to close off the noise, and you have to deep dive and discover it by yourself. Don't read Financial Times, don't listen, a gossip sort of dinner. Do your own homework, listen to the youth, listen to those that are technically qualified. And one of the epiphany moments, there was all these Buffetts and Krugmans, but then there was Andreessen and Fred Wilsons and, Adam Backs of the world. And who would you trust with the heart surgery, a cardiologist that has been doing it all his life, or to an economist that has been sort of writing, ISML models? That's my only advice. Rely on yourself.
I guess the main thing that I would suggest is that what's happening is new enough and weird enough that looking at the existing legal system, I think, isn't going to tell you what's going to happen. I think it's a much more political question than a legal question. So if you're thinking about how these technologies are going to be adopted or shut down over the course of time, I would just suggest thinking about the global power landscape and the incentives, not looking at what's written in the code right now.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting space to be in, because it really is about self-sovereignty and about people reclaiming their rights. And we're seeing that all over the world. We're seeing it on a very small scale right now. But I think particularly, and obviously the privacy stuff is something that's important to me, particularly in the privacy space, it's about taking back your data and about having control over your data. We live in a world where every other week there's something else that got hacked, and all your data is outside of that company again, and a bunch of hackers have your usernames and email addresses and passwords, and they're certainly never going to do anything nefarious with it. And so now we're starting to get to a point where the technology is advancing fast enough and rapidly enough that we'll be able to have private commerce, where even the entity you're dealing with won't know your true identity, where that will be private. So when they get hacked, and invariably they do, it's not your data that's out there. And that's a world that I want to live in.
I'll agree with everything that's been said already, and this is certainly about educating yourself. But at the end of the day, I think the world is all about incentives, and I think in cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology in particular, we see a lot of distortion of incentives where people talk about decentralization or these visions they have when in fact they're basically printing money out of thin air, raising money for it, and keeping most of the money themselves. So in many of these things, I think it's very important to understand the incentives, the business model, how the economics flow, and what the implications are. And then I think the second piece is really thinking about relationships, surrounding yourself with people who share some of your values, who have integrity, who have a history and a track record of operating in the industry, because there is a lot of trust that's been built. It's funny, for being an industry and ecosystem that's all about obfuscating and removing trust, trust's actually been, in my view, one of the more critical components to being successful and creating connections and connecting ideas and people and capital in a meaningful way. Just being really thoughtful about the incentives we're creating and how they may go to harm or further enable some of the ideas we're talking about around equality, fairness, the right to privacy, the right to be forgotten, the right to enter and leave at will, the right to participate. All of those things I think are going to be really, really critical in ensuring these things work the way we'd like them to.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. This was I'm extremely thankful and humbled for having the opportunity to talk with all of you this morning and listen and learn from you. There was a lot of information. Thanks to 8 partners and especially to Eric for putting this actually together. So maybe a quick applause for putting this all together. If you still have a couple of questions open, like most of my old investor friends, that's why we wrote the Trust Technology that was launched at CES. Grab a copy at Amazon, and otherwise, we have the smartest people on the panel on this side here. Okay. Thank you very much, and it was a real honor and pleasure to be here today. Thanks, everybody.
I worked on WhatsApp already.